Would you believe me if I told you this clip you're looking at right now came from a lens that's over 150 years old? Well, here's the story of how I made that possible. I've always kind of been interested in these old finds at antique stores, and not necessarily camera finds, but just kind of anything with a lens. I have been coming across recently something called a magic lantern. And what it is, it's basically an early projector where you would project, in this case, a glass slide, so an image on a glass slide. A light from behind would project through this lens, and it would project the image on a wall. So the first thing I do whenever I get one of these home is I'll take it apart and I'll clean it. Specifically, I'll clean the glass just to see if there's any issues with it. Usually a piece of glass that's this old, and I say usually, but probably 99.9% of the time, it will be just covered in fungus, which fungus on a lens is kind of unfixable, and the lens is almost garbage at that point. But the thing I noticed with this one is the glass was perfect. I truly couldn't believe it. It made me think that it was almost a reproduction because the glass looked too good to be this old. Clearly, the person who owned this knew that this was a problem and stored it in just absolutely perfect conditions for apparently its entire life, because this glass was just so unbelievably clean. When I took it apart, I almost couldn't believe it. It made me think it was a reproduction, because I just can't believe that glass this old doesn't have any fungus, any scratches, any dust. It was truly remarkable once I took this thing apart. So the next step after cleaning the lens, making sure it's dust free, is to hold it up to the camera and see if we can get an image, and that's what I'm doing here. I knew I was going to have to build something to keep this lens off the camera and keep it between 4 to 8 inches away, but I didn't know how far exactly. So that's the next step, is hold it up to the lens, get a very basic image out of it, and figure out how far from the sensor that lens needs to be to see an image. So as you can see, it ended up being about 4 inches off the sensor is how far I need to keep this lens to be able to get an image out of it. So the next step is usually the hardest for me, and that is trying to figure out what and how to build this lens so it will connect to my camera and stay that perfect distance away that I need it. I'm sure there's better ways to do this and higher quality ways to do this, but my favorite way is to take all of the parts I have, my camera, the lens mount, the lens, and go to a hardware store, find someone who's willing to help and ask them to brainstorm with you, say, this is what I need to do, how can we make this happen? And this trip to the hardware store that I took to do this produced the exact piece. I almost couldn't believe how perfectly this entire project worked out just because of this piece alone, and here it is. So as you can see from this clip, I was using the barrel that came on the lens as kind of like an outer shell to the lens. This kind of caused me a huge amount of headaches and kind of pain throughout this, because I just could not figure out how to mount these two together. I was thinking about gluing them together. I was thinking about maybe a weld of some sort. And after about a week of brainstorming and trying to figure out how to make this work, how to make it secure, how to make it look decent, the funny thing is I ended up getting rid of this exterior barrel, and the lens perfectly fit inside this PVC pipe, and I was able to use the metal clamps on it to tighten it around the lens. Didn't need any glue, didn't need any substance to try and keep it on. Those metal clamps worked perfectly. Is this lens breaking any records for its image quality? Absolutely not. But is it a 150-year-old lens that I can mount to my camera, walk around, and have a great story to tell people when they see it? Absolutely. I don't care about taking a perfect image. I really love the idea of having images with character, and that's why I do this. Every lens tells a different story, has a different feel, and to me that means more than having perfectly crisp photos.